Good evening and welcome to our Energion Publications Hangout using Google Hangouts on air tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about Lent, and especially Lenten children. To quote a parent I heard recently, I don't want to spend time on this downer stuff with my children. Let's wait for Easter and hunt Easter eggs. So what does Lent have to do with children? I'm talking with Joel and Leigh Anne Watts. Who wants to grab that? What does Lent have to do with children? Can't you just ignore it?
No, I don't think so. I think that, you can focus on it, the ashes and the sackcloth if you want, or you can go the way that we're suggesting, which is to find a way to make it a quiet time for your family as you prepare for Easter. And so you put it inside the mindset of the family, the person, and the child that you should take a special time, if not daily or weekly, then seasonally at least during Lenten season, to create a quiet time for God as you prepare for Easter.
Okay, now I like that line, prepare for Easter, but I'm wondering how many people know what you mean. I think a lot of people would think of preparing for Easter as having to do with, buying the peeps and making Easter eggs and making sure that the sanctuary is set up with the right liturgical colors. That's preparing for Easter. But I guess that's not what you're talking about, right?
No, and I'm not discounting that because I like my peeps. And so help me, if you get the wrong liturgical colors, we're going to throw down. But a lot of times I think that we miss the preparation for Easter because just like Christmas is not just a day, it's a season, Easter is not a day, it's our entire faith. So we want to make sure we have a preparation to honor that particular day. And so just like we have with the 40 days of Christ in the desert, we have the quiet time that Christ would go out into the wilderness, into the desert to spend time. We prepare ourselves for Easter, in spiritually speaking, with all the other physical things going on. It's that spiritual side that counts as well.
Okay, so then how do you do that with children? So we're talking about fasting, and as I did in my little hypothetical quote, all of these downer things. You start with the Ash Wednesday, and you're getting the cross on your forehead done in ashes, and how did the children go with this?
I think I'm going to let Leigh Anne do that because I'm going to preface this by saying that the way this started is that a couple years ago, Leigh Anne did a Advent calendar, which was my first, and then we started after that with Lent. So maybe she can talk about some of the ways that they can get children involved.
We involve the children by setting aside time for them. All families are busy. We're busy too. But if we set aside a time with them to talk about things and then to just do something fun with them, it doesn't have to be, this very serious, complicated discussion with your 5-year-old, but spending time with them as a sacrifice is important as well.
So what you're talking about is the parent is sacrificing time for the children at that point.
Yes, but of course, long term, you gain always by spending time with your kids. You're not going to go wrong there.
Yeah. Well, isn't that also, and this is for either one of you, part of the very concept of sacrifice, that sacrifice is sacrifice, but it's also gain?
Yeah, I think so. I think theologically it is. We sacrifice ourselves, our part of our creation, when we have kids. So we sacrifice our freedom as individuals. We do all that, but in sacrificing my freedom in marriage, I gained a whole lot more. In sacrificing my freedom as a single person when I had children, I gained so much more. So we want to really teach the children, set aside time of your day, which we would theologically say sacrifice, so that you can have this quiet time for God. And some people would say, well, that's the wrong way to look at it, but we have to start somewhere, and we have to get back to this time, this place in our lives that we are recognizing that God does have a place in it. And so if we have to get into the habit of putting aside some time for God, maybe that's where we should start.
Okay. I do want to take just a moment for a technical point. I don't know, I'm having a little bit of trouble with your audio at this point. I don't know if maybe we're getting a little too high of volume, but I can still understand you, but it's breaking up slightly. I don't know if you want to look at your volume. I don't know how I'm sounding to you.
No, you're sounding good.
Okay, so if you want to take a look, I can understand you. It's just a little bit. We're getting a little bit of breakup at points in as you talk.
And to be honest, maybe my voice. I'm still recovering from our tryst with cold and flu and fever.
Well, we're glad that you're recovering rather than going the other way around. Okay, now, Joel and Leigh Anne. Joel is already an Energeon author. He's the editor of the collection titled From Fear to Faith, Stories of Encountering Spiritual Walls. But they have co-authored now a book, Lenten Devotionals for Families. And this book is going to be coming out early next month. And it's in the final stages of preparation, so we're making them work real hard right now. So they have done some serious work on this topic. I know, doing this with their family and then preparing some ideas. Before I go on to another question or two about fasting, I know from reading the introduction to your book that you had an interesting time with this. You didn't grow up celebrating or commemorating Lent. I didn't either. In my growing up years, we didn't do Lent. We really didn't do Easter. And I know that's true in a lot of churches, and people would say, well, now you're turning into a Catholic. So are you two turning into Catholics, or what?
Well, I am. My Catholic friends tell me I'm Catholic light. Leigh Anne won't let me. She's really happy with the United Methodist Church. She is not, but so I flirt with Rome a lot. I may or may not have a giant poster of the current Pope around in a picture and a letter from him saying he's praying for me. So.
Okay, so Leigh Anne, you're going to keep him from heading that way.
Absolutely.
The Tiber. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So if somebody says this idea of celebrating Lent with a family is too Catholic, other than saying that you have a letter from the Pope and he says he'll pray for you, what do you say?
Well, growing up, we didn't celebrate Easter, we didn't celebrate Christmas because it was all too Catholic, yet we have pretty much the same set of scriptures that came through tradition. We can call it Catholic, we can call it whatever you want to, but Lent is not just a Catholic holiday, it's also celebrated in the Orthodox faith as well. And Protestants and Anglo-Catholics, Anglicans and us Wesleyans have really started to return to our contemplative side, which we can call Catholic, but honestly it's more of a true Christian spiritualism that we're returning to. So they've held it in trust for us, ready to come back and embrace it. What I would say is those who are worried about making it too Catholic, turn to Scripture and realize that these are the same books that Catholics uphold as well. If we're too afraid of being Catholic, we have to look at the creeds. The creeds talk about that Catholic Church that we believe in. And so I'd like to say it's little c Catholic.
But little c Catholic is something that we really all say in at least in the churches that recite the creed. I've got two audience comments. One, just to for encouragement, it may be my incoming audio that's the problem, because I have a note from the audience that they're hearing you just fine, so that makes me happy. And I'm hearing you well enough to understand, so you know, I'm probably just being too tense about the technology. I have been known to get that way. But I also have a question that just came in from the audience, in case everybody saw me looking down while you were talking and fumbling with my phone. This has come, my wife and business partner Jody watches our Twitter feed, and you can send questions in via Twitter at Energion. That's @ ENERGION. And we'll get them passed on. So here's a question from the audience. Do you have your children read the scriptures in your devotion time? And I recall that you have scriptures in here from the lectionary in your book. If so, what translation do you recommend for doing that?
We have a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 5-year-old. When we first started reading the scriptures as a family, Abigail was...
Sophie was just born, so she was 7.
7. We used the New Living Translation, the NLT. You have to make it somewhat appropriate. I would always avoid the Message. However, if that's the translation you choose, then go with it. Make sure it's something that they are comfortable reading. So the NLT is great for families because it's a very easy-flowing read. And you don't have to worry about if they got things wrong or a lot of the footnotes or anything like that. It's a great Bible just to have in front of you.
Okay. I'll add something on that since I do some things with Bible translations. I don't know if you've used the Contemporary English Version. I'd make the same recommendation as you do for a range of ages of children. For younger children, I think the Contemporary English Version does well. That's to be distinguished from the more recent Contemporary English Bible, which is you know, a somewhat different sort of a translation. But I certainly agree that the NLT is a good balance there for family reading.
I like the REB, but that may be more for my taste. But if I was going to read with a family, something like the NLT, I think the NIV, people use the NIV as well. I don't, but that's just a preference thing. But we actually started Abigail reading the Bible with the NLT.
My experience with the NIV would be that it's a little less easy to read than the NLT, although not really much so. But I'm interested to hear that you like the REB, because it's actually, for my own reading, when I read in English, the REB is my favorite.
Mine too.
But I'd have to agree that it's not one that I use with family group very often. Okay, well, that's what we have on the audience questions for the moment. So I'm going to turn back to a question of my own. We started talking about fasting. We talked about this concept of sacrifice. So, and again, this is, how should I say, it's a question derived from what I hear in the hallways of the church or the church educational building. We say, isn't it kind of Lent-like if you don't actually fast from all meat, for example, or leave off all desserts? Or one of the favorites I've heard is a Daniel fast, where you do just vegetables. As a vegetarian, I like that one because I can give up things for Lent without giving anything up for Lent. So what about this, where you make your fast something other than traditional things that you know, on everybody's list?
I think our first Lent, what did we fast?
Technology.
That killed me, Henry. We fasted for about an hour and a half each day, Monday through Friday. And then you have to remember, this is the first year that the iPad came out.
I thought it was about 3. I thought it was like
About 3 hours, yeah.
5 to 8 p.m. 5 to 8 p.m. every night we would fast from technology.
All technology. Phone, computer, I'm misty-eyed thinking about it. TV. And so I want you to keep this in mind. As soon as the iPad came out, I rushed to the store, and I was the first person in Charleston to get the iPad 2. And because it was Lent, I could not play on it for 3 hours. That may not sound like a lot, but I think that, and the story that kind of goes along with that was when I was in high school, I went to a Southern Baptist camp in Glorieta, New Mexico, where one of the questions and one of the things was what gets in the way of spending time with God? And being 15 or 16, it was like, well, Star Trek, because all I want to do is watch, eat, breathe, sleep, Star Trek. And so, I recognized that was drawing a lot of my time. Well, then we kind of recognized that technology was getting in the way of each other and of the kids and of everything else we wanted to do. And so while I think post-Vatican II, Catholics give up meat as a symbol of the death of Christ, for us, giving up something every day is more of that preparing that quiet time for Easter. And so that's what, we try to find something that we can give up as a family to draw us together.
Well, I certainly don't minimize the whole idea of fasting technology. I'm a person who can end up with a laptop on my lap, a desktop computer within arm's reach, and my phone and my tablet. And all of them have something showing on there. So the whole idea of fasting technology makes me twitch. But yeah, I understand that. So let's connect in with that. My other question here, I'd say, again, this is something that I've heard said, I don't have time to meet with my children on this sort of a daily basis. Can't the church take care of this?
What answer that?
I guess I don't understand. In what way could the church take care of it? Just one day a week, or every day?
Well, you have, I don't know, because I think it's probably a bad idea to suggest that the church is supposed to take care of explaining, or doing spiritual disciplines with your children. So understand that I don't find this question to be a very well-founded one, but I have definitely heard it, so I'd like to get you guys to talk about it. I'm assuming that people who say this think that if we can get the folks to teach a little bit of religion to our kids in Sunday school on Sunday and maybe Wednesday night if we bring them, that will take up the responsibility for spending time dealing with spiritual issues with our children.
Well, growing up in the Deep South, church and religious activities was a lot of part of it of every day. And some churches have activities every day, and families don't. And so I don't think we should, and this goes back to something I said earlier, regulate God to one day of the week, regulate God to one building, and regulate the voice of God in somebody's life to one or two persons on Sunday morning, Sunday school teacher and our pastor. And so part of that is no, the basic building block of any society is the family. The family builds the community, the family builds the church, the family builds a city, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you're looking at ways that families shape faith and everything else, it starts with families. So if you ignore it and let somebody else do it, somebody else will, I promise you. Somebody else will fill in the faith formation of your children. Google offers great help in doing that. It's not to be recommended, but it's there to babysit for faith formation. And so this is, it's a way to remind parents that we have a responsibility for our children. It's a way that we also honor for those who infant baptize, our covenant that we made with our children to raise them up. And frankly, it's a way to honor the scriptural commands about raising up your children.
Okay. Well, I have to confess to agreeing with you, but I do know, and we're going to get to a question here in just a minute, uh, about how to work this with your children, and we'll talk about what people can expect in your book, which covers a lot of the ground that we're talking about here in more detail. First, let me talk just a little bit about you guys. I know Joel better than I know Leigh Anne, because Joel is already an author with Energeon. He was editor of the book From Fear to Faith, Stories of Hitting Spiritual Walls. And that was a rather enjoyable set of testimonies of folks who moved from, well, I think from the position of fear into a position of faith, over a period of time. And I know, Joel, you're working on your, are you not working on your doctorate or your STM?
Doctorate.
Tell us about it, just briefly.
I will be writing. I'm still writing. I am writing. I promise. I promise I'm writing. Somewhat weekly, in however way you want to take that word, weekly, on Galatians, the death of Christ in Galatians, the actual atonement mechanism. So it's not so much a model, but it's proposing a mechanism that has not been proposed before in Galatians, or so much with the death of Christ, and explaining how, in particular, the death of Christ becomes the atonement, and what that means for such things as cosmology or the new creation, free will, and what it means for our actual salvation.
Okay, so let me just to keep the controversy up, I take it then you're not saying that penal substitutionary atonement is the one and only way to understand the atonement.
I would say there's a lot better images than
a lot better. Okay.
As a matter of fact, if we could not have substitutionary atonement, I would be okay with that.
It's interesting with you writing from Galatians, which is probably one of the places where advocates would be pretty strongly, believe that they got that theology, wouldn't you say?
Unfortunately, yes. Wesley would say that he was a hair's breadth away from Calvinism, but it's that hair that makes the difference between right and wrong. And so I hope that when I make the argument, people don't simply reject it because it's not, but actually look at the facts of what it is. And so I will get eventually pretty in depth to the actual mechanical workings of atonement, which may sound boring to a lot of people, but I promise it won't be for the most part.
Okay, I think it's very relevant, and I'm going to let us get an introduction to Leigh Anne here in a minute. But the first one thing I wanted to do was connect what you're writing in Galatians. See, there's a method in my madness here. Is when you're talking about preparing for Lent, talking to your children about what Lent means, and eventually what Good Friday and Silent Saturday and Easter are going to mean, that's going to be impacted by those kinds of what I tend to call, nuts and bolts that you're talking about. Wouldn't you say so?
Oh, it is. I think that my current study and the way that that Christ died has made me more of a conservative viewpoint on high Christology, on the creeds, and because Holy Saturday, more so in the Orthodox faith, is devoted to the harrowing of hell. I look at that and go, the Christology that it takes to accomplish the atonement makes it higher, and so the 40 days of preparation becomes more holier.
Okay.
And more important as we approach the actual death of Christ, Holy Saturday, and the resurrection.
Okay. I'm going to, kind of hold that thought because as we go into the second half hour, when we might ramble just a little bit more, I may ask you to talk a little bit more about it. I know that's not precisely what your book is, but I want to talk. Leigh Anne, our people who have been following Energeon publications and our viewers here are probably less acquainted with you than with Joel. As you and I both know, he tends to stir things up a bit when he wants to. So we know that you're the mother of three and you're a blogger. Tell us about both of those things.
Well, I've been a stay-at-home mom for about 12 years. I like to call it a career mom. That sounds much more professional, right? They are probably the most important thing to me. So, I've spent those years taking care of them, and the blog is new. It's less than a year old.
Name.
It's houseology.com.
Spell it.
No, I'm not going to spell it. And
it's spelled weird, so...
It's a DIY blog. I write about building things, making over rooms, crafts, all things home, recipes occasionally.
She is more at home in Lowe's than I will ever be.
Lowe's is definitely my favorite store.
Okay. And what's more, you put up with Joel on a regular basis, is that right?
I do, and people ask how I do that. And I think it's because I'm the least controversial person you're ever going to meet, and he's not.
So you get a kind of a balance there.
A balance.
Okay, and all this business, though, about doing the crafts, that has something, again, to do with the book, and we're talking about the forthcoming book, Lenten Devotions for Families. We're going to be getting these ready to go early in the month of February, so they're fairly close. As a matter of fact, I would expect it'll only be 2 or 3 more days before we'll put this on, make this available for pre-order. Provided all of the little pieces that have been coming together come together in those couple of days. So, and in there you have Lenten activities. But before we go into asking you about Lenten activities, I have to negotiate my phone again, and we have a question from Jody, who is watching for questions, but she put in one of her own. She says, in fasting me time, you shared about giving in service. Would you share about some of the options? In other words, what would you put in there as a thing about giving in service? And I remember this from the book as well. You do talk about it.
Some of the service things that we do are working in our soup kitchen at our church. It could be helping your neighbor. Just any small thing that you can do. I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge commitment. It can be one day out of all of those days, just to pick something to help someone in your community.
Well, you see, now that sounds almost easy after you talked about fasting technology.
I totally agree.
After you say that, I can handle just about any other alternative after you mention that one.
I would much rather spend 3 hours working, cleaning, doing something, and have my 3 hours of technology, because I could check my phone while I'm washing dishes, or I can drift off into Garth Brooks or Facebook while I'm cutting grass. But please let me have my technology, because if I don't have technology, then I've got to talk to the kids and talk to the family, and you know how much fun that is after 3 hours.
12-year-old girls can talk a lot. They're a match for even Joel.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is making some commitment. You say one time, do you recommend people make a more regular commitment during Lent than that?
Yes, in the book, the thing that we discovered after that first 3 hours of technology that we gave up that first Lent is that, that's not a bad idea. So even if it's 30 minutes a day or if it's an hour on the weekends, You put everything down, you put everything away, and you go and sit together and do something without technology. Because for 11 months out of the year, you are buried. I mean, how many social media networks do we monitor a day? And that gets in the way. Leigh Anne's Houseology blog, houseologie.com, takes space. Unsettled Christianity takes time. By all the stuff that I start on the internet takes a lot of time, and we get caught up in that. We're human, and it's part of who we are. But when you put it away, and you start to realize, I do spend a lot of time on this, because even after that 3 hours, everything was there as I had left it, and I could go right back to it. So when you're saying making a commitment is when you realize that, volunteering a day or an hour at church or an hour at something for a service on a Saturday, some kind of public service, that's not a bad idea. Do it, and you will actually start to see more benefits throughout, not just Lent.
I was thinking what you're really saying here is developing ideas and perhaps habits, spiritual disciplines during Lent that are actually good to apply through the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean,
it's an opportunity for growth spiritually and as a family.
Okay, let me ask a quick question here then, so that we can scare a few parents who don't spend that much time with their children. About how much time do you like to set aside to do the activities out of the book? What kind of a time commitment is somebody trying to make if you follow this or a similar kind of a program?
I would say most of our activities are actually pretty simple. An hour in the evening on a weekday, and maybe a few hours on the weekends. And of course, you can make them as complicated and time-consuming as you want, or as simple as you want. I mean, if you only have 30 minutes in the evening to spend doing something, then pick something off of our list of activities that suits you.
And in the end, the activities are very important, because when you sit down with some of the activities and your kids start to do them and you're going to get involved, but we also understand that you can't do that all the time. Things will come up. You never know really what's going to happen. Sitting down to read the scripture and talk about the devotional may in fact be the only 15 minutes you get to celebrate it, but at least that forms a habit and an expectation after a while of that quiet family time, and you can build from there.
I noticed I had written down for myself to ask you how you get the kids to sit still for this sort of thing, but then I remember you have, like karaoke as one of your activities. Can you tell us how karaoke can become a Lenten devotional activity?
Henry, I hate when people laugh at me, and I will bash them. Not physically, but in my mind. But, my youngest, my 5-year-old, now likes to refer to me as chicken butt. She does this about 15 minutes when she's getting ready to go to bed. Singing karaoke, because I sing so awful, gives everybody a chance to let off steam and to maybe laugh at one another when they maybe couldn't.
I mean, don't you feel pretty vulnerable when you're singing karaoke in front of people?
So we have here sort of letting off steam and perhaps humiliating oneself as a spiritual discipline.
Yes, and it goes well at parties.
Okay.
I think a lot of times we're so uptight, and you have to realize that you have to come down and unwind, and doing something like this together helps everybody unwind, and in unwinding you increase that bond.
Okay, now I have to admit that you now have caught me off guard, because I truly didn't expect to be talking about parties and Lent in the same, in the same conversation, except as we do around here, you party Mardi Gras, and then you do, you start in Lent, and it's really a sad thing.
To be honest, that was the only part of Lent that we cared about was Mardi Gras.
So you
Growing up in Louisiana, I mean, Lent was always the Catholic holiday, and so we
just celebrated Mardi Gras and left Lent alone.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then while you're doing that, so since that was your, one of the things again that I noticed from the introduction, and good introduction by the way, because it gave me a lot of questions about what was coming up in the book, questions in the good sense, saying, okay, here's something I want to see, see how they're doing it. So how did you get into it? Obviously, you didn't grow up doing Lent all your life. But somehow it became important enough for you to write a book about it. How did you get to the point where you said, this is something we need to write a book about?
So we left fundamentalism, and we had the NLT Mosaic Bible from Tyndale House. And I do recommend that particular edition of the NLT more than anything. But we sat down and said, okay, so we're going to do something with Advent.
Let me clarify. We had left fundamentalism, but we had not started a new church yet. So there was a gap there where we had no church to attend.
And let me even clarify that. We thought we were going back at some point. So, but we started to follow the church calendar. And we go, okay, so Advent's
Joel, let me interrupt you for a second, Joel. Before you go on, so that people can follow, the Mosaic Bible, which somewhere I have one on one of the shelves behind me that you can see all these stacks of books. There's a Mosaic NLT back there, and I've gone through this. And so I understand what you're saying about it and following the church year, but tell everybody else what that Mosaic Bible does for you.
Well, the Mosaic Bible is set up on the church year, so every Sunday you have it tells you what season you're in, such as Advent, Epiphany, Ordinary Time, Pentecost, Lent, and so on. It gives you devotional readings from the church fathers, current writers, devotional space, and of course scripture readings. But it's according to the church year, which, not being Anglo-Catholic or somewhat Protestant during those times, I never knew they had a lectionary. And we have a lectionary, which is one of the greatest things ever. So, we started following the church calendar, first with Advent and then Christmas, because if you're going to celebrate Christmas, you might as well celebrate Advent. And then if you're going to celebrate Advent and Christmas, then Epiphany, and it just kind of trickles down. One day you wake up and the whole world's Catholic. But then we get to Lent, and we go, well, let's do Lent. And so that's when we gave up the technology, and as we move further down and back into United Methodism, we go, Lent is becoming more of a commonplace in Anglo-Catholic and in Protestant churches, and we started to see it in Pentecostal circles as well, and more charismatic, and even evangelical circles. And so and Leigh Anne has all these crafts, and the way she did Advent, the way that she has led the activities with Lent, it's like, well, let's put it together and maybe write a book for people who are just getting into Lent.
Okay, so the aim point of this book, because this is where wanted to ask you, is who is going to benefit the most from your book? You're really aiming at people who are not used to doing Lent, as we put it, and so that they can get an idea of how to do it.
Yes. Yeah, and hopefully it's those people who also want to add something to their Lent, who goes, well, maybe it's not just about sacrifice, because sacrifice, I think of it this way, Christ sacrificed, so he gave up, but he also gave something. When we sacrifice, we give up, and we gain something. And so Lent does not have just to be about, I give up caffeine for a whole 40 days. It could be, I add this to my time. And no matter what you're doing, you're trying to create this space for God. But it's for those people who maybe want to do something different in Lent, and people who want to have maybe a different Lent. So they've celebrated Lent all their lives, but they want to do something a little bit different.
I would guess then that this would also be valuable for people who may have been doing Lent, but it's become kind of a formality, and they don't they don't think about it as much, or especially they don't get their children involved. And the book, by the way, for our viewers, is Lenten Devotions for Families. It's by Joel and Leigh Anne Watts. They live in Charleston, West Virginia, and I think they go to a United Methodist Church there, Christ United Methodist Church in Charleston. Am I right on that?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Well, so we're looking at people who either have a Lenten devotional practice that has gone stale, or people who have never done this before, who've grown up like you and I did without, where the church year was just not part of our lives.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, so it's basically, it can really be for anybody who wants to or who has celebrated Lent.
Okay. And in particular, and this is something I want to emphasize for people who might be thinking about getting this little book, is this is designed for families. This is not a go out somewhere by yourself set of practices. This is things for the whole family. Leigh Anne talked about being very comfortable at Lowe's, and there's a lot of activities in here. Now, before we go on, also, Joel, you said you write at Unsettled Christianity. I believe the URL for that's unsettledchristianity.com.
Yes.
Are you a faithful husband who has a link to your wife's blog on your blog?
Oh, Henry.
I caught you out to lunch.
Thanks, Henry. Okay.
Give us the URL for your blog again, Leigh Anne.
It's houseology.com. It's
houseology.com.
Yep.
You gotta spell
it. It's house, OLOGIE.
Houseology ending in an IE, okay, .com. So you guys can both be caught on the blogs, and so I just wanted to emphasize that. I'm going to ask Joel again. I'm going to point his way to talk about explaining what Lent is about in terms of preparation for the feast. It's kind of the days of preparation, especially as you are studying in the book of Galatians. But before that, I want to give you a chance here to kind of wrap a ribbon around any of the things that I've been asking, or things that you may have wanted to say that I've been talking too much and haven't given you a chance to do it.
No, this whole idea is that I think that we need to return to an authentic Christian spirituality and not go for the untested and untried trends. Lent did not spring up overnight, and it's not likely to go anywhere. And as we see it growing, I think that we need to take advantage of the fact that more people are looking to the ancient church tradition to discover more of who they can be as Christians. And as families go, Leigh Anne can answer that.
Okay. Go ahead, Leigh Anne.
I think families in general have a time issue. They don't have time for so many things, and I would hope that our book helps them to see that it doesn't have to be a huge commitment. It can just be sometime in the evening, and our activities are simple. I hope that it gives them some ideas to even bring in things of their own to do. You'll notice that most of our activities aren't necessarily scripture-based. They're not, a cross-craft or things like that. It's just time to bring your family together, to have a little fun, unwind, and then talk about things.
Okay. I like that in particular because when I go talk with young people in youth groups and so on, probably the most common thing I hear is people don't have time for us. So I like the thought of putting aside, letting letting the children and our young people know that they're important enough that we're going to set aside some time. Now, one thing I missed on my list here was I had in my notes, I was going to ask you to talk us through or demonstrate one of the activities from your book. Do we have something that you can talk to us about? Just say, I mean, other than I already hit the karaoke thing, which most of us know how to humiliate ourselves with a karaoke device. But other than that, would there be something that you could just kind of, so people get an idea of what you're going to suggest for them?
Sure. Sure. One of our activities is to paint a canvas. You know, just gather a few art supplies. Most families have paint and markers and crayons on hand already. Just gather some supplies and a couple of canvases. I mean, they're pretty cheap at most craft stores. They're easy to come by. And sit down as a family and make art together. You know, art doesn't require a lot of concentration, so you can sit there and start a conversation with your family and with your kids while you're making art. I mean, it's very relaxing, and it just opens up a time frame for conversations to start.
Okay. Now, when you say make art, some people are going to get intimidated by the phrase "make art." Do I have to make good art?
Oh, absolutely not.
Henry, this is me.
Okay.
This is Sophia's. This is Sophia of me.
Okay. I think it's a pretty good likeness, actually.
Everybody seems to like it.
I think it's important to not get too serious with these activities with your kids. I mean, we have cook a meal together. We have put a time capsule together. It's just fun activities that don't require a lot of planning, a lot of supplies, a lot of long, drawn-out thought.
Get your eyes off of the television and out of the business and spend time together so that you have a chance to talk. That can be done even over really, really, really lousy pictures. I just want to make sure, because anything I paint will be really, 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 really lousy. So I just, wanted to
call
make
it
sure.
Abstract when it's really bad.
Yeah, call it modern.
Okay.
There was a study a couple years ago I saw that said that families who spend that half an hour at the dinner table together every day, their kids are less likely to go into dangerous behavior. They're more likely to be open to one another. And so having this around together, this 15 to 30 minutes at a time, I think will benefit, even if it's 40 days. Hopefully it'll turn into 360 some odd days, 320 some odd days. We don't do it all the time because we can't. We're busy with basketball and stuff like that. But, if you can carve out that time for your family, it goes a long way.
Okay, and I like that you're saying 15 to 30 minutes. It's one of those where I have to think, if you can't find 15 to 30 minutes for your kids, there's some other problems that you need to be working on, I suppose.
Yes.
I agree.
Because you're not talking 2-3 hours or anything like that. Okay, we have those activities, and yet you're doing the scriptures. And Joel, I wanted you to, and of course Leigh Anne too. I'm hitting Joel because he's writing this dissertation on the book of Galatians. And personally, I think anybody who is writing a dissertation on the book of Galatians should be harassed frequently. So how do you talk about, well, starting with Good Friday? We find Easter, I think we find fairly easy to talk about, but how do you talk about and prepare children for Good Friday? Easter wouldn't be coming around if there wasn't a Good Friday coming before it.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest days to write, because in my mind, I know my theology of Holy Saturday. Good Friday, on the other hand, is, all right, so how do you make the craft around the death of Christ? And so it gets a little awkward, is then you're celebrating, and then you want to tell your children about this violence that was done this horrible act that was done, but yet we're supposed to celebrate it in such a way. And so it's I look at it and go, we start with 40 days of preparation. So we're up to that point. I think it's day 38 when we get to that, day 39 on Good Friday. And so, but before that, we've had these 38 devotionals of leading us to understand why Jesus is doing what he's doing. It's getting us to the point to understand that there is a break that is going to be repaired. And this is the way that it is repaired. And then on Holy Saturday, that break is not only repaired, it's completely done away with a harrowing. And then suddenly on the resurrection, then we see the proof of that repair.
So you think of this when you say there's a break that's going to be repaired, and I think probably even our young children are aware that there are things that aren't right. So then you speak of this really entirely positively.
Yeah, I mean, that's because I'm not Reformed in that sense, and I'm not PSA. I look at it as Christus Victor, which means, basically the positiveness is that Christ died to set us free to defeat that which held us down. And so I look at it as it is a sacrifice. And in my dissertation I call it a few other things, but it is a self-sacrifice that Christ does on our part. That's an act of an ultimate love to bring us and repair that breach with God. But on the same token, it doesn't just pull us up, it pulls God down to us as well.
Okay. Leigh Anne, how do the children do with that?
Our children have done fine with it. I mean, we don't start them at 3 years old telling them about this terrible stuff that happened. That's not how we approach it. But at some age, when they're ready for it, I think it's appropriate to talk about it. And our kids have reacted fine. They're pretty well adjusted. But, I mean, I think that most parents know their kids, and they know when they're ready to talk about something and when they're not.
Okay, so there is now, with this book and with the celebration or the commemoration of the Lenten season, there's a place here for basically the parents to adjust the message of each day.
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, what I did was I have every lectionary for the next for every year. There's 3 years of lectionary. There's those passages that can be read, and the devotionals there, primary of course, but the parents can latch on to something and say the Psalms or something else and go, I want to talk about this, because there are passages throughout the lectionary that are not so easy to go along with, and so I try to counter the devotional with that, and so it's it goes along with parents start to shape the message for your children.
Okay. Well, I have an audience question from Steve, who asks, is it asking too much to speak to children regarding Good Friday, as Jesus lived a life of full integrity that led to his death and introduced the concept of integrity to kids?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that when you introduce the idea that Jesus lived and died for a reason and did not waver from that reason, especially when we get to the Garden of Gethsemane, when he could have gone other ways, but he knew his mission. And the atonement mechanism that I see in Galatians, that I see in other parts of the New Testament as well, requires Christ to have known his mission, even though he may not have fully known who he was as a son of God, but to known and to understood his divinity in such a way it required him to live up to his mission. And so a lot of that, I think, is being who you are supposed to be.
So you're saying essentially Jesus stuck with integrity to who he was supposed to be, and you could teach integrity through that means.
Yes.
Now that would be something you could probably introduce a bit younger than some of the other concepts that we talk about a lot. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think so. And we've had last 2 years in this country, we've had a lot of rough spots that we have used, excuse me, to introduce more concepts as our children have grown up. And so we start with integrity. We start with who Jesus is. Well, with our 5-year-old.
Okay. It's interesting. I almost wish I'd started. We'd started on that one a little bit sooner. We only have about 4 minutes left to talk about it, because I started thinking there of you can really talk integrity in ways that could be built up starting almost as soon as you have a child that you can talk to, and that is certainly something that's very important. Would you agree?
I agree. I think that if you take Christ as the goal of who we're supposed to be before God, you're not going to go wrong with an example, because he had the mission. He knew what it was, but he was also willing to see that mission grow, such as when we get to the Gentile woman in Mark. Suddenly, Jesus has this revelation that maybe his mission was a little bit bigger than what he thought.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at the time. We have about 3 minutes left. I'm going to do two things. One is to again mention that the book is Lenten Devotions for Families. If you look at, you can go on our website at energion.com and go into the book catalog, and this will be going on pre-order shortly. It might have made it by tonight, but not quite. And will be available before this Lent, so you may want to take a look for it. Joel is also editor and one of the essay authors, or rather two of the essay authors. One person is two authors in his book From Fear to Faith, Stories of Hitting Spiritual Walls. We have a lot of stories where we talk about people running into problems with their faith and ending up outside the faith. This is people who have found a new place of faith, escaping from the fear that had once beset them. The book is From Fear to Faith, and that's Joel. And then Joel and Leigh Anne, Lenten Devotions for Families. So now either or both of you would like to just kind of sum up. We have right around 2 minutes.
Okay. All right. So the Lenten Devotionals includes a devotional based on, for each day, Monday through Saturday, the scripture readings from the lectionary. I was able to do all lectionaries all 3 years, the Revised Common Lectionary, so you Anglo-Catholics and you Protestants will find some home there. We have activities designed for the family, and we have general recommendations. Find service projects. You know what? Maybe choose something to give up the entire time. I cannot tell you what it means to give up technology for 40 days like that, for an hour at a time, and how much you will gain from that quiet in your head. You could probably write an entire book just on the benefits of that. But the activities are there, and I think it's something that will grow and help to shape your family, and the importance of that.
Okay. Well, thank you both for being with us, for taking the time. I know you were both recovering, and I know you have the three lively young ones doing whatever lively young ones do while their parents are interviewed about new books. So thanks for being with us. I'm looking forward to the release of your book. Again, that's Lenten Devotions for Families by Joel and Leigh Anne Watts. And we thank everybody for watching. Good night.
Thanks.
Thanks.